Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. So I don't have much time to do this one, but I want to do it while I'm thinking about it. Let's do a 420. Let's do a 420. So, you know the saying. Blaze one if you got one. Blaze one if you got one. Let's have this conversation about society in the future. Let's talk about a futuristic society. Our potential futuristic society. So you've heard me make this point before that there are certain social requirements for an individual. I call it a real reality because ultimately that reality, whether you believe in that reality or not, that reality does affect you. Meaning you do need food, nutritious food, clean water, clean air, shelter. You need a sense of fulfillment. Insofar as those things are missing, that person will suffer. When you look at that from a larger context of society, you can kind of see some of the ills that our society has and how those things are being expressed based upon the lack of an individual. I would make the case that in the future the goal would be to make people self-actualize. Society would say, what do we need to do to help these people to become the best person that they can be? Now, if technology keeps going the way they're going, one of the other arguments I've made is the idealness of a society, meaning the peak efficiency of a society is an equation. It's not a flat value. Meaning from a just conceptual, logical standpoint. If you have those social needs, that's a constant. So let's call it constant of S. Well, your technology in that society is a variable. Meaning the more you can use technology to deal with your needs, the better off that society, or the more ideal that society can be. So it's almost like the idealness of a society is proportional to the technology of that particular society. Now, what I'm getting at is, if you have a situation where you can automate every process, well, then you can decouple the human from labor. Ultimately, their needs are met. Now, let's go beyond that, though. You've decoupled need, meaning when I need something, for the most part, I can get my hands on it because our society looks to the self-actualization of the individual, meaning those things are afforded to the individual or access. There's another part that's just as important, if not more. The cognitive leap. The cognitive leap. So yes, you as an individual may have your needs met. Yes, you as an individual may be self-sufficient in having those needs met. But is that enough to keep up with the technological development of a society? Meaning, human nature itself. Is human nature capable of dealing in ways with a society as complex as our own with our current level of awareness and our current level of understanding? Meaning the petty grievance. So if you look at Twitter, look at Facebook, you see the posts that the people put. You see the cockfighting back and forth. You see divisions on very minor items. You can look at this progressive thing and the way these divisions break apart on minor items. The larger context is usually ignored. Ultimately, people function in a way of their own specific reality. And in functioning in their own specific reality, the larger context is often not paid attention to or completely ignored. Now, some of this is attributed to the society itself, meaning because we have a capitalistic model and because this model is pressure-filled, meaning it's a difficult existence. It puts pressure on the individual to compel them to action. So you can bake that into cake and sense of some of the aberrant behavior. But you still have this issue of, even in ideal situations, people sometimes act in ways that are amazing. And I would make the case that even in a technological society, you would need to evolve people fast enough to deal with that society. Meaning there is no conversation I can have with you to get you to understand why society should be arranged in a particular way. I can't have it. You can be absolutely rational, and there's no way I can change your mind on that particular point. You live through your reality box with your own biases, your own ideologies. But what if that wasn't the case? What if you didn't necessarily, what if you weren't stuck with that individual's ideologies and biases and their inability to look at a larger context? If you had the ability to use technology to meet your other needs, is it possible that in a complex society, the society looks and says, you know what, we need to find a way to evolve the people in this particular society, and we need to do it fast, otherwise we're going to kill ourselves. Now, we've had multiple wars. One war, I think, was 50 million people in World War II. There was another one, I think, in World War I, it was like 10 million. We murdered 1 million people in Iraq. You go from North Korea, the Korean War, you can go from one after the next. Our world is awash in murder and slaughter. How do you evolve the human species fast enough to compensate for the technology? Because the concern is man is going to kill himself. And man has certain biases in him that makes his behavior, or that allows him to be corrupted. Meaning we need a way to evolve the individual to the point where he's of a higher consciousness. It's almost like an evolution of sorts. Now, I'm making the point that in the same way technology handled the other issue, technology may also be able to handle this issue. Now, look at how we're using virtual reality. We're literally putting people within a game space. Now, scientists, research has been going on with this idea of spoofing the signals of the electromagnetic signals. Everything that we see and perceive is just electromagnetic signals. There's no light in your brain or in your skull. All of these things, your reality, this thing that pops out, is conceptual. Ultimately, it's electrical impulses. At least in the physical matter reality standpoint. What if you could spoof those impulses? Not with some bulky device that you're sitting on your head, but with something that you can actively hijack your nervous system and present the reality to you. Because again, it's important to understand your reality around you is just electrical impulses. I mean, ultimately, our senses convert that stuff into electricity, in which case our brain can understand. What I'm saying is, you can spoof those signals. And with sufficiently developed technology, you may be able to spoof those signals. So when you're given the signal to run, you can put somebody in a game space of sorts. When that person wants to run, you can analyze the person's brainwaves and allow that person to run. Meaning, you're creating this system of sorts where the individual is now inside of a digital space. And because you're hijacking his brainwaves, that individual doesn't know any difference between the game space which he's in and the real world, or reality. What does reality mean when there's multiple realities at your fingertips? Now, this technology can be used for really amazing things, particularly if it progresses. So when you get to the point where that technology, we're pushing for VR, we're pushing to insert the individual into some kind of game space, will you get to the point where consciousness itself can be plugged into the game space? If you get to that point, evolution becomes a trivial matter. Now, in the same way that we go to schools today, you can see a situation where they say, we're going to have this person live 20 lifetimes in order to evolve them, put them in one experience after the next, so that particular individual will be able to deal with experience. We make mistakes when we're interacting with new experiences. So would it make sense to say, we have a technologically developed society, we have an advanced society, we need to bring people up to speed in order to function in the society, in order to persist in the society. We have technology to get people's needs met. We also have technology to put the individual in the game space. The only next hurdle is, all right, now that we have the technology to put the person in the game space, we need to create situations of life. He can choose his body. He can choose whatever body he wants. We choose situations, and we inject that person into the game space. Now, because we have access to the consciousness of the person, we realize that if the person knows that he's dreaming, it doesn't get the same bang for his buck. So will that advanced society say, all right, we need to nix his memory? For the most part, you have subconscious drives and stuff like that, particularly based on things you want to accomplish in that particular life. But would that society say, yes, this is a way to do that? Instead of living one lifetime with all the vagaries and the stakes and everything else, we can have this person live 20 lifetimes, 100 lifetimes in the course of a year. It's his schooling. Meaning all of that stuff takes place inside of cognitive processes in the real world. Because your brain doesn't necessarily know the difference between that cognitive process and the real world. You should bring those skills with you. Meaning you're able, depending upon the society, to dramatically advance the society itself using technological know-how. That's an amazing thing. And think of it further. You can even take it to the perspective of saying, let's tweak our perception of time. Meaning the consciousness that's interacting with that particular game space may perceive time as being one thing, when the reality of things is something different. So in the same way, you can have a dream where you feel like you've gone through 30 years and you wake up, it's been all of 10 minutes. Would they be able to do the same thing for that particular consciousness in order to expedite his understanding of the world and reality? We're getting into some immensely interesting territory. I mean, you're even talking about territory to the point of saying, what if they hack somebody? What if, yes, you have the potential to deal with somebody's brainwaves and consciousness and everything else? Are those people susceptible to hacking? And what does it mean for society if you can have hackers that don't just have the ability to hack into machines, but also the ability to hack into people? This person thinks he has 2 kids. He doesn't have 2 kids. This person thinks he's a bad guy. He's not. He's a car salesman of sorts. Like, you can go through one after the other where you're changing the perspective of the individual because that individual is plugged into some kind of technological conduit. And while you may not necessarily be able to access the consciousness directly, if that consciousness is tied to some kind of digital software, then the weakness of the consciousness is the weak point. Software. What does the world look like when people are also hackable? What does the world look like also, though, when you have the capacity to go through years and years, multiple lifetimes, in one single lifetime, and develop yourself to be the best person that you could be, the optimum human being, in mind and physicality? That's a fascinating thing. I mean, that's a fascinating thought in regards to what we can use technology for, how we can use it for our own human evolution, and what are the drawbacks and the potential problems of making that advancement, of merging man into machine in that sense, and trying to better himself. What are the weaknesses? What does that society look like? And what does crime in that society look like? That's fascinating. That's fascinating. Alright guys, if you enjoyed the content, feel free to share, write, subscribe, and you can always support the work through Patreon.